Hi, everybody. Welcome to Readers That Write. Today we've got a really fun topic that I think you guys will really enjoy, and it's something that I've wanted to create a video on for quite a while. And that's the 5 things I wish I knew before I published my first book. So we have a lot to cover. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you enjoy what you're seeing and hearing, please ring that little bell down in the corner, and you'll get notified of any more of these coming up. So let's get into this and talk about these 5 things that are critical to an author, but aren't really discussed. I've been to a lot of different writers' conferences, writers' retreats, and a lot of different writers' trainings, and none of these come up. None of them are things that I see discussed in writers' forums or BookTube or Book Talk for that matter. And I want to see more of them because they're critical to us as writers. Our mental health, our ability to write, all of that stuff is wildly important and it's stuff that we need to talk about. So the first one is something that I don't hear enough of, and I wish I did. The only person I ever hear even kind of casually mention this is Brandon Sanderson, when he talks about the 13 books he had to write in order to get the first one published. And that is, perfecting your craft does not mean rewriting the same story over and over again. It does not matter how many times you rewrite that story, you are not honing your craft. Honing your craft requires you to go out and do various different things with various different skills and various different styles. And by doing that, you will hone your craft. You'll learn your skill set. You'll learn what makes you, you. And you'll learn what is actually your strengths and your weaknesses. So how do you hone your craft if it's not rewriting the same story over and over again? It's writing other stories. If you've got that one story that you really, really think is going to be a big hit, but you don't feel like you're a good enough writer for it, great. That's normal. Take that story, write it once, there's no problem with that, and then put it aside. Let it simmer. Then write more stories. A great example of this is Dragonsteel that Brandon Sanderson wrote. That was one of his more early stories, and he does want to return to it. He talks about it all the time, but he needs to feel like he's ready for it, and his readers are ready for it, his fans are ready for it, and when that happens, he will rewrite it. And that is the approach you need to take to your baby. If there's that one story that you're absolutely obsessed with and you feel like it'd be amazing, write it once, put it on the back burner, then write other things. Because by writing other things, you'll learn the skills that you need to write that story the way it should be written. There's a lot of different ways you can achieve this. One of my personal favorites, and the one I always recommend, is short stories. Short stories are a way you can play and experiment and do whatever you want quickly. You don't have to devote 6-8 months to the novel in a genre that you may not be a fan of by the time you get a couple thousand words in. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Like I said, you can experiment with different genres. You can experiment with different writing styles. You can experiment with different voices. For example, a couple of recent ones I did, I wrote a horror story to try out a genre. It's a genre I don't read. I do like Grimdark, and the line between Grimdark and horror in some stories is kind of a gray area. So I decided I wanted to flirt with it. I wanted to see what would happen, and I was a published finalist in a contest for it. It can work, and now I'm considering maybe writing some more horror. I don't have a lot of good horror ideas, so that may be a one-off thing I do every once in a while, but it worked. It worked very well for me and my style. So another thing you can do is changing up your voice. And this is something I've also done. I have an anthology coming out here later this summer. And I wanted to take a more satirical approach. It's still a pretty serious story, but it does have that dry sarcasm that I wanted to try and embed. I'm a big fan of L. Ron Hubbard's writing, and he has a lot of that. So does Craig Allinson, although Craig Allinson does tend to lean a little bit more into the comedy. And I wanted to see if I could do it. I enjoy reading it, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And I think I actually pulled it off pretty well. So you may be seeing more of that as well. I don't know. What I really like to write doesn't cater too well to it. So I may just slip it in every once in a while. But I would have never known that I was good at those things. The horror and tension aspects of horror, or the dry sarcasm of certain types of satire, are two skill sets I didn't know I had in my writing toolbox. But by actually taking the time to perfect my craft and hone it and learn some of the skill sets and cadences for those short stories, I now have those toolboxes, or have those tools in my toolbox. So I'm able to use them later in stories that I wouldn't have been able to in the past. Now, the next thing that's important, that one's a big one, and that one is something that I wish was preached from the rooftops. But this next one is another one of those extremely important things that we don't talk about as writers. And that is breaking through things like writer's block and writer's exhaustion. We talk about it a lot, but we don't talk about how to deal with it. There's several things there's two real big things that you should know that help resolve those issues. The first one is having another hobby that is not writing and reading. Book exhaustion is a real thing for writers. Reading too much and writing too much can lead to mental exhaustion. You need a hobby that does not require you to heavily do either. Some authors can get away with reading a genre that's entirely unrelated to their genre, and I say great for them. That's awesome. That is not something that works for me. And because of that, I've actually gotten into Warhammer. Warhammer 40k, you've probably heard me refer to the books several times, but I'm also a wargamer. I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy painting the minis, and I enjoy using a different part of my brain. So a lot of times when I hit writer's block, I sit down and paint a mini that takes my mind entirely off of my problem with my book and allows me to change things up and rethink the way I'm thinking. And 99% of the time, when I return to the story I'm writing, it's easy. I can break through, not a problem. Or at least I have a direction. And there's actually a lot of different skill sets that wargaming and TTRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons can help you as well in the honing your craft part as well. And I'm going to have a whole other video coming up here in a couple of weeks about that. That's something you'll see Dan Wells preach a lot, and something that Brandon Sanderson talks about a lot, but often his comments are misconstrued. But I've got a whole other episode coming here in a couple of weeks about that, so make sure you stay tuned. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe. There's a lot of really fun content I've got planned for the next couple of months, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. And the next is taking a break. It is okay to take a break. Not everyone is a full machine like Brandon Sanderson. He is a terrible person to compare yourself to as an author. Right now in his career, he has honed the skills of writing to a point where he can crank out books. He can crank out words and do insane feats that most authors can't. And that's okay. It's great for him. I'm a big fan of his. I'm happy he can do that. But as an author, I have to understand that I should not be expected to meet his schedule and his expectations and his writing level. First off, my books are 100 to 150 on the high end, 1,000 words. That is half to a quarter of a Stormlight book. So putting out, for me, 150,000 words a year, whether that be a novel or a novel and some short stories, depending on what genre I'm writing in, is great. That's where I should be. For Brandon, that's a quarter. That's 3 months. That's what he needs to hit in those windows. And that for him, that's great. He's also one of those weird people who is able to both relax and write and still write under deadlines. For me, I do actually still get a lot of relaxation and almost therapy from writing, but there is stress involved, a lot of stress involved in hitting deadlines, meeting expectations, and all of that kind of stuff. So being willing and understanding enough to take a break when you need it is great. There is no problem with it. And rewarding yourself with a break when you hit a milestone, also a great idea. That is one of the few times you'll actually hear Brandon talk about taking a break, is after he finishes a novel, he usually takes 2 or 3 weeks off of writing to let his brain relax. He'll play video games, go to the movie, do anything that's not book related that's possible in that window. And it's something that every writer should plan into their schedule, in their book writing schedule. And I deeply, deeply recommend that you work that into your planning and your strategy as you start to publish. The next is embracing constructive criticism. This is something we talk about sometimes as authors, but as a lot of authors are extremely protective of their work, which is great. Being that passionate and that involved in your work is exactly what you need to do to create it. And I understand that. But constructive criticism is what will take your book to the next level. The easiest way to do this is cultivating a good writing group. Having that solid structure of people around you who are willing to read your writing and help you out will drastically improve your writing skill very quickly. Because we all have different backgrounds, we all have different mindsets, and we all have different things that bug us in writing. And that skill set that you gain through other people critiquing your work will improve your writing very quickly. And your ability to read someone else's work and look for flaws will help you read your work and find those flaws as well. So I always recommend finding a good writing group. Sometimes when you're starting out, finding a writing group is hard. The easiest way to do that is look and see if there's any type of writers guild or organization locally that exists. This is a great place to start. A lot of them may not write what you write, and that is fine. In my personal opinion, I actually like to have 2 writers groups. I like to have one that's in my genre or genres. Currently, one of my writing groups is a fantasy and science fiction genre group. We all write fantasy and science fiction, so we know the tropes, we know what to look for, we know the faux pas, all of that kind of stuff of the genre. And on top of that, I have a second writing group. That writing group is a general writing group. There's some people who write nonfiction. There's some people who write biographies. There's some people who write romance. There's a couple of us who write fantasy and science fiction. There's a few of them who write historical fiction. And because they're coming from an outside area, sometimes they point out things that don't actually make sense. And that's fine. You don't have to do everything they tell you. But they also point out things that a casual reader would be bothered by, but someone who is a deep lover of the genre wouldn't. That translates into, by fixing that problem, if it's something that won't ruin the enjoyment for the more serious reader, fixing the problem translates to more book sales and more ease of reading. So having those 2 points of view is fantastic for your writing and for everything you do. And the next way to get a lot of good constructive criticism is through participating in contests. In contests, you may not get feedback every single time, but a lot of times you can tell by your results if your writing's improving. You don't have to write to win every time. That's fine. Writing to see what sticks, it works. In the very beginning of this episode, we talked about writing short fiction to test out your skills and hone your skills and try different things to see what fits you best. Contests are a good way to test and see if what you think fits best is what actually fits best. One of my favorites to do that with is Writers of the Future. It's free, it's quarterly, which means I get 4 short stories I can test out every single year. It gives me a good sense of if this is going to work and if this isn't. Don't get me wrong, I am still trying to win. At least 2 of my 4 stories a year are me trying to write my absolute best and honing it to a level that should put me out there and be extremely good. And every single one of those stories has at least gotten an honorable mention, which is great. But every once in a while, I'll have a story that I think will work. And if I can hit it, it will be spectacular. And those stories I test as well. A lot of times I'll test with Writers of the Future or another contest. A lot of times you'll get anthologies and contests that give you a certain prompt to work with. That's always a good way to be inspired on those things you want to test. So the next part of this is cultivating resilience. Being a writer is hard. Doesn't matter which path you're taking in writing, it will be difficult. You will get bad reviews. You will have hard points. That is life as an author. But there's ways that you can build this up to help yourself out over the long term. And honestly, these 2 points are something that I didn't know and were some of the biggest struggle for me in my early author career, which is why I want to share them with you so badly today. The first is get your social media moving early. People love to see authors in the process of writing and be with you through that journey. By doing that, you're cultivating an audience for your book before your book is even out. As long as you're keeping them up to date on the process and there's a definitive timeline, they will back you. It's a great way to crowdsource. It's a great way to build your story. It's a great way to have an audience ready to go when the story launches. This is something I did not do. I was not told. And unfortunately, it wasn't part of the publishing process back in 2020. Should have been. It really should have been. But it wasn't. It's something that no one told me even existed. So I hadn't been posting about my books until my book came out. The announcement 2 weeks before my book came out was the first time I posted that I even write on Facebook and Instagram at the time. But by starting this process early and getting it going, I've seen so many authors have rapid success because you're sharing things like, here's some AI art of my characters. Here's roughly what I think they look like. Here's a snippet from the first couple chapters of my story. Here's a working idea or a lore fact from my story. And doing those things attracts readers. And it attracts the more serious readers who will become strong fans of yours if you can pay off on what you're putting on social media. The next rejection is par for the course. Every single author, until they get to the New York Times repeat bestseller list, will deal with rejection day in and day out. Your short stories will get shot down from magazines over and over and over and over again. But when it sticks, it feels amazing. Same with your novels. Typically, the estimate I've heard, and in my experience, to land an agent, I actually haven't landed an agent yet, but to land an agent requires at least reaching out to 100 plus agents to land one. That means you will get 99 no's. It's hard. It sucks. It takes forever. But understanding that from the beginning, that it will be a slog, but the end is worth it, is something I wish I knew as well. I kind of lucked into my first publishing deal. It was a writer's conference. It was only my second time ever attending, and I decided to pitch the story I had. I'd been writing it for years, and I decided to test the waters and landed it with a small press. I was super excited, but I didn't have to go through the rejection cycle of trying to find an agent, and now I'm going through it all over again. It's something that is very, very hard to understand until you're doing it. But going in even slightly prepared will help you out. Okay, the last one, the fifth one. This is probably one of the most important things to note as a beginning author. Choose your publishing method. There are several different paths you can go down. Traditional publishing has been around for hundreds of years, but it has major downsides. Indie publishing is brand new. It has upsides, but it also has major downsides. So knowing what you want to do will help you cater a lot of these other steps to make that possible. For example, indie authors, you have zero marketing support besides yourself. How are you going to do that? Well, if you followed my suggestion for the last big point and you had your social media early, you've already got a leg up. That's great. If you're traditionally publishing, that will still be super helpful as well. There is nothing wrong with doing that either way. But understanding that you are entirely in charge of your content and your information as an indie author is sometimes a pro and sometimes a major con. It is a major time suck that pulls you away from writing for a long time. The next is the actual process it takes to traditionally publish. This is a long process. Typically with an indie novel, there's usually about a year turnaround for most authors from the time you hit the first letter on the keyboard to start the story to it being released. That's a rough estimate. Some take longer, some take a lot less time. Some indie authors can do it in 6 months. That depends on your genre and what you're writing, which is great. For a traditional published novel, it's typically the same window to what the indie author would consider published, but then it has to go through the query process. The query process, unless you're deeply established, will take probably a year to 2 years. Then you have your agenting process, which is where the agent goes and tries to sell it to the actual publishers. That can take 6 months to a year. After that, you have all of the internal stuff that happens at the publishing house, where the acquiring editor is trying to make sure that everybody's on board and selling it to the other departments so that they know how to properly market your book, what type of marketing material, your cover art. They're going through the actual editing process, doing reviews, changes, revisions, all of that fun stuff, which takes roughly another year. So from the time you hit the first letter on the keyboard to publish can be anywhere from 2 to 6 years. That takes forever, especially if this is book 1 in a series. That means you should not start writing book 2 until you have that final okay that everything's ready to go and it publishes on X date. So that could be a 5-year window between book 1 and book 2 writing it. Now, that is great for a lot of people. The big pro with traditional publishing, you get a nice paycheck. You get a really nice paycheck up front. And then if your story does really well, you'll get royalties creeping in afterwards, which is great. That's fantastic. I love it. I've only experienced this with short stories. So my cut is not anywhere near as big as a novel, but it is a great feeling. I love getting that check. And then having a royalty creep in every once in a while is great. But as an indie author, you fully control that. You get paid your royalties pretty much immediately, roughly every 6 months, depending on which place you published at. And while you're not making as much money up front, you do make more money long term. On top of that, you can crank out books much faster because you're not constrained by industry deadlines or timeframes. For example, traditional publishing typically has a rule that an author can only publish one book under one name per year. So unless an author has multiple pen names and they are writing under multiple pen names, those books will only come out once a year. There are exceptions. For example, Brandon Sanderson has 5 coming out this year. But using Brandon Sanderson as an example, he's typically the exception to the rule, not the rule. You also have things like audiobooks that are handled typically by the publishing house in traditional publishing. They are really hard to deal with by yourself. They are very expensive to deal with as an indie author. So typically, indie authors won't get an audiobook made of their book for a long time. It will take years typically to get that information out and make enough money that you can afford to do the audiobook, unless you're doing a Kickstarter. Kickstarters are a new thing. I have never done one, so I can't speak on that. But that is another pro to indie publishing. You can do that. And you can get some of the pros of traditional publishing without having to deal with all of the cons of traditional publishing. But, like I said, neither of them is wrong. Neither of them is evil. You need to figure out what fits best for you. Okay, so those are the 5 big things that I think I wish I would have known before I published my first book. Let me know below if you guys have other things that you guys wish you knew, or questions you have, or things you want to know. I'm happy to talk to you guys anytime I can and share the things I've learned and learn from you guys. So please show those down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. We're pushing really hard to grow our community and get things established to go ahead. Thank you for joining us on Readers Who Write today.